Chris and Tim are wrong about Sailor on the Seas of Fate. And now that I've said that, I can justify using that little bit of clickbait in the title. I'll get into the actual meat of the argument. So recently, Tim from Secret Fire Books, Chris from Liminal Spaces, and Jim from News for the Yelling have been doing this read-along with the Elric series, the main 6 books in that series of Michael Moorcock novels. So this last month, they've read Sailor on the Seas of Fate, and I've been keeping up with them as I've been going along. And both Chris and Tim have stated in the videos they put out that they think the order of stories within Sailor on the Seas of Fate, because it's a book made up of 3 individual short stories, they say that the order of the stories should be reversed. And spoilers for Sailor on the Seas of Fate in this video and in the ones that they've put up. So if you're in the know, Sailor on the Seas of Fate starts with like the big world-ending stakes, the big weird island, and the 4 eternal champions have to combine into one super being with like 8 arms and 8 legs and the super sword, the whole thing. And I get it. I get why people think that should be the climax of the story. That should be at the end, where like the big money shot is right there, right? Like this giant monsters fighting each other in this weird thought space that ties the universes together. But when you keep in mind, and even within the story, you can get at this without knowing the details of Michael Moorcock as an author. But if you know, like, he was this counterculture, punk rock hippie type of guy, then you can more easily see why the stories are ordered in the way they are. The stories are not ordered in terms of stakes, either stakes to the world or personal stakes for Elric. The stories are ordered according to how much interest Elric places in the events happening right in front of them. Because in the first one, Sailing to the Future, Elric's not particularly interested in what's going on. When he and the other aspects of the Eternal Champion arrive at the island and they have to combine into this super being, Elric is against it. He does not want to sacrifice his personal autonomy, even if it means saving the multiverse or the universe he's living in, right? He's just not interested. And when that story ends, it specifically says in the book that like all memory of it is fading from Elric's mind as if it were a dream, right? He's not interested in it. And after it's over, he can't be interested in it because he's not going to remember what happened. But in the second story is this cracked mirror retelling of the events of the first book, Elric of Melniboné. And I know that the books were written out of order. And so that one story was published before the other one. But Moorcock's not an idiot. He knows where this is going to go, what has happened, what is going to happen, and how to tie it all together in with the individual stories, regardless of where in the order they've been published. So in Sailing to the Present, which is the second story, there's a cracked mirror retelling of the relationship between Elric, Yirkun, and Kaimaril. And it's represented in this folktale, this history of Melniboné that's been passed down to Elric, about an evil wizard that was in love with this woman, but he begins to think that she has affections for someone else, and so he tortures her to death, but while also vanishing the would-be suitor to some other realm, and he exists as sort of this spirit that haunts the sorcerer forever afterwards. This is the retelling, a little bit warped, of the relationship between Elric, Kaimaril, and Yirkun, except in Sailing to the Present, the sorcerer dies, and the lovers ride off into the sunset. But what's going to happen in the next book, the next volume, which is Weird of the White Wolf, what we find out is, like, in this instance, the evil sorcerer, which is Elric, lives, but then, like, the would-be lovers, they die. It's the tragedy of Elric in that story, and he takes a passing interest in the events. I think Elric, where it touches on the history of Melniboné, but also Elric doesn't quite, but sort of gels onto the fact that there's a similar thing happening here as between the sorcerer and the 2 lovers. He takes interest in that. But it's in the third story where Elric shows the most interest in the events. He is rescued. He and his companion are rescued by the ship captain, who is on a quest to find an ancient lost city of Melniboné, where legend has it that is where all of Elric's people come from. That's their history. That's their place in the world. It originates from there. And Elric is intensely interested in this. Now, for me, reading that, I couldn't quite glom onto the fact that why Elric was so keen on getting there. It didn't seem to gel with his character, but I understand it now as like this is the order of events in the story. This is the intensity Moorcock is placing on the story. It's like the interest Elric shows in the subject is how this is padded out. And he gets to this ancient city. There's weird stuff goes on, and he has to call on his patron, the Lord of Chaos, Arioch, to come and save him. And Arioch gives Elric the option to escape with his life at the expense of the lives of his companions, but Elric shoots him down. And as a result, the city is destroyed. This ancient abandoned place of the Melniboneans, like all of it in its entirety is busted up into decay. But it's also going to have repercussions in that Arioch in the future is not going to be so kind to Elric. And all this has to do with the fact that Elric, in and of himself, is a fatal character. He will not succeed. When he shows very little interest in what's going on, he does gangbusters. It's the team up, everything's big and grand, and he succeeds in what he wants to do, as he does in Sailing to the Future. But when he's actually intensely interested in the outcomes of things, not just for himself, but in trying to rescue other people, it sets up events where he's setting himself up for failure. Right? Taking off Arioch is not going to do him any favors. In fact, even in that story, in order to get out of the city alive with some of his companions, he is forced into essentially sacrificing the captain of the ship that rescued him, a person whom Elric considered one of his friends. Not that he has very many of those. So sort of this thing is like, yeah, just reading this book for the weird thing, essentially looking at the scenery. Because there's a lot of weird things that happen in each story. And if you're just going through and saying, okay, here's a weird thing, here's an odd thing, here's something to look at, you are going to place Sailing to the Future, you're going to give that more weight than the other stories. But if you look at this as this is about Elric and not about the things surrounding him necessarily, the order of the stories makes a lot more sense and it carries a lot more weight. It's that counterculture mindset Michael Moorcock has, so that he will show you the grandiose thing, like this is the big event, this is the big battle between the multiverses and everything. But it's all stagecraft, because like the real intensity of the story is small and it's internal, it's inside Elric that the thrust of the narrative rests on. His tragedy, a truly tragic Shakespearean character in Elric, that he is the villain and victim of his own circumstances. So everything within Elric's world could have stood and continued on had he not gone along with his own ambitions to try and figure out life, essentially. Which is what it placed Yyrkoon on the throne of Melniboné. It's what killed Kaimaril. It's what drove him to take up the Darkblade Stormbringer. And like I said, I say that Tim and Chris are wrong. It's a matter of opinion. And even with my understanding, I'm not going to lambaste somebody else for deciding that they would rather have had the stories in a different order or liked one over the others. Personally, I like the middle story best of all, even though the bookends to that have the better imagery and the more weird and fantastic elements to them. The middle story is really fairly self-contained and sort of intimate in its narrow scope and what it's actually trying to achieve. But that's all I have to say about that.